Professor Brasseur, thank you very much. And Director General Pavel Kabat of EASA, a most remarkable institution, and I hope everybody in Vienna is very proud of being a neighbor of this unique and world-renowned institution. And Professor and President Franz Fischler, President of Austria and President of the European Forum, Albach. What a great honor it is to be together with you this evening, and I want to thank you for turning out for some brainstorming together. We wouldn't be here if we weren't in a bit of a mess. I'm not going to give you simple answers to simple questions because the questions are very complicated and the answers do not quite exist. But I hope that I can give some clarification about the challenges of sustainable development and also some reasons for hope and some clarity about what a path to sustainable development for the entire planet might mean. I wish we were on that path now. We are not. We have serious and unmet challenges that will intensify in the future. We have not yet shown our capacity as a species and as a global political system and increasingly a global society to face these realities with the kind of clarity and expertise and division of labor and effectiveness that we do in many other spheres of life. In a way, many of the problems that we face are problems of our triumph, after all. If we were not so good at producing things, if we were not so good at extracting things, if we were not so good after 300 years of modern science at growing food and sustaining a planet, we also would not be in a situation to be wrecking the planet. So our dangers are in a way also the reverse side of our successes. But that fact also is a reason for hope. I'm going to argue that we have the tools and the knowledge to find our way through these challenges, and that it is a question of organization, capacity, and determination, and I would say fundamentally a moral question, more than an economic question or even a political question, of how we proceed in this century. The problems that I'm going to talk about this evening, ladies and gentlemen, are unique to our generation. So this is a special challenge for us. We are the first generation that can end extreme poverty. We are the first generation that can utterly wreck the planet through environmental degradation. It's quite a responsibility, quite an exciting challenge for us, but one that unfortunately we haven't properly recognized yet. We are, in a way, the first generation living in a truly global society. This is also a phenomenon that we are clearly not quite ready for, psychologically, emotionally, institutionally, politically. But if you look at this interesting graphic representation of the world, the blue lines are the shipping lines, and the white lines are the airline connections, and the green are the roads on the world map. What they show is a fully interconnected world, of course. And the world has been connected in one way or another for thousands of years. And with the voyages of discovery of Vasco da Gama and Columbus, the world was put together in ocean travel already 500 years ago. But the intensity of the interconnections waited for the information age and the age of aviation, and other marvels that link us together economically, socially, by disease transmission, technologically, in production systems, in financial systems, in a shared climate context, with an intensity that we have never experienced before. And sustainable development is a field, a way of thinking that is required in this wholly connected world. We didn't need this field beforehand. We were warned about it 40 years ago in the first World Summit in Stockholm with the famous book, The Limits to Growth, in 1972, which for me is quite interesting. That was the year I studied freshman economics at college. And I was told as we were assigned that book, don't worry about it, it's not right. Markets will solve the problem. Now I know a little bit. 42 years later, I'm here to tell you markets will not solve the problem. Markets can help in certain ways, but they will not solve this problem. We have to solve the problem through joint action, through decision-making about the value of our future. I'll refer back to a statement a little over half a century ago, which really defined the paradox of our time. And I will refer to the words of President John F. Kennedy. The many friends of mine who are here today know that I like to quote President Kennedy. He had a way with words and a way with leadership that we remember half a century later. And he said already in his inaugural address, "For man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." And of course, in his 1,000 days as the presidency, we came as close as ever in human history to the disaster of nearly abolishing all forms of human life in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it was Kennedy's wonderful leadership together with Nikita Khrushchev a half a century ago that helped to pull the world back from the nuclear brink. 50 years later, this statement, this paradox, that we can end literally all of human poverty on this planet, and at the same time that we are capable through bad judgment, indirection, lack of insight, lack of clear shared moral purpose of saving a planet, this remains true. Today, the threats are a little bit less about nuclear confrontation, though I have to say it's stunning to be living in a Cold War shock this week of a kind that we thought did not exist anymore, and yet we feel back in the Cold War this week. It shows that even the more traditional risks have not gone away. But what's new 50 years later is that our capacity to destroy all forms of human life, and by the way, millions of other species while we're at it, in what is sometimes called the sixth great extinction, is more about the inadvertence of our impacts on the physical planet, the ecosystems, biodiversity, the ocean chemistry, the atmospheric chemistry, and, of course, the climate system of the planet. That's pretty good for one species, you got to admit. To take over Earth's systems in this way, in this fundamental way. No single species ever before in Earth's history has had that impact, but we don't know how to manage it. We're called the driver of Earth change now, but I don't think we're driving with our eyes open. And so the question of how we can choose the better side of this equation, how we can choose to end all forms of human poverty, and at the same time choose to save the planet, is really the subject of sustainable development. We live at a time of much good news, and it's worth reminding ourselves of that because, of course, the bad news comes enough that we probably don't need reminding of all of the bad news. But we live in an age where ancient scourges of disease, early death, and extreme poverty and hunger are being brought under control. We see ever more passionately the places where that's not the case, but we should observe that in the world taken as a whole, there is considerable progress, even dramatic progress. If you look back just to 1990, 24 years ago, and measure the rate of extreme poverty in the developing countries, as the World Bank does, meaning living under a poverty line which is defined right now as $1.25 per person per day. The poverty rate in the developing countries was on the order of about 43%, best estimate. By 2010, that poverty rate had declined to 21%. As of now, though we're 4 years waiting for the next round of data collection by the World Bank, we could guess that the poverty rate has declined to perhaps 17 or 18%. That's still over 1 billion people, but the proportions have come down sharply. And the wonderful news is that even in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the epicenter of extreme poverty on the planet, poverty rates are falling, and a continent that was mired in economic decline or stagnation for decades is now the second fastest growing region of the developing world behind developing countries of Asia. This is positive news, and it makes it absolutely realistic to take President Kennedy's point that we could choose to end extreme poverty. And it's notable, ladies and gentlemen, that the World Bank Development Committee, which is the governing policy board of the World Bank, at its meeting last April, voted to make ending extreme poverty the bank's mission by the year 2030. So for the first time, they took a timeline, because if you draw this line with continuing extrapolation and add in some decent global behavior to help the poor countries, it's quite possible to see the end of extreme poverty. Not all poverty, not relative poverty, not poverty of $2 a day, which would feel very poor to us, but the kind of extreme poverty that kills is indeed coming down and could be brought to an end by our generation. One of the reasons and one of the points of most optimism for us is the well-known phenomenon depicted here, Moore's Law. We're living in an age of breathtaking technological advance. That has been true, I think, for every generation since 1776, when Mr. James Watt brought out his new steam engine and changed humanity forever. Each generation has had a wave of technological change, starting with the steam era, and then advances based on steam, rail, and ocean steamers, and then the great breakthroughs of electrification, the internal combustion engine, aviation, gas turbines, the nuclear age, the modern computer age, which was given birth intellectually, one could say, in the 19th century, but really in the 1930s and 1940s by Turing and John von Neumann, and then given life in real computers by the early 1950s, at which point some of you may know the president of IBM said in 1952, computers, we'll only need 2 or 3 of them in the United States. We won't need more than that. But in